Okay, so what is a continuation bet? A continuation bet is when, let's say in this hand, we raise before the flop and have the initiative, and a player calls and checks to us, and we bet. So that's a continuation bet. So we have the pre-flop initiative, checks to us, and we bet on the flop. Throughout this video, I will be using a replayer to show hand examples from 25 no limit and 50 no limit that I think will help you guys understand what hands you should be continuation betting and what hands you may want to slow down with. So with 7-9 suited in a four-handed game, it's a standard open for me from the cutoff. And we get called by one of the cards. Okay, so the board is 4-5-8 rainbow, giving 7-9 a gut shot, meaning a 6. Any 6 on the turn or river will give us the nut straight. That's not a very good hand. A lot of beginning players may think, we only have 4 outs, maybe the 9 is good too, so at best 7 outs here if we're called and they have a pair to win. But we have the pre-flop initiative, so this hand that has some equity when called can bluff out better hands on the flop. Any ace high, king high, queen high, jack high, 10 high, all of which are better than ours, many of which fold to a continuation bet. So our bet does accomplish something. We have some equity and probably the worst hand. So oftentimes we will be able to bluff out a better hand. So he checks and we go ahead and make the continuation bet. Also notice the board texture and what cards on the turn will improve our hand strength. That's going to be very important in this situation when we are called. Many hands will give us additional outs that we can fire the turn as well and pick up pots at that point. That being a 7, so that'll give us a pair and a gut shot. A 9 giving us top pair and a gut shot. A 10 gives us an open-ended straight draw, doubling our outs when behind from 4 to 8. A jack gives us a double gutter, so either a 6 or a 10. So that's a lot of cards. So already that's 6, 7, 9, 10, jack. That's a lot of cards in the deck. But also we have a backdoor flush draw. So we have 2 clubs in our hand, 1 on the board. So if another club falls on the turn, we now picked up an additional 9 outs. That is a lot of cards that we'll be able to barrel on the turn when we are called. So it's not the end of the world if we are called with 9 high in this spot. If we are feeling ambitious and we feel the player may have like a weak pair, we could also be barreling hands or cards on the turn like the ace, any king, any queen, any jack. We've already decided we're betting jack, but all of those cards as well are scare cards for our opponent. We easily could have been raising with big cards before the flop and made a standard C bet on the flop and picked up a pair on the turn. So we can also represent overcards. So in this case, yeah, it's a standard continuation bet because we have a decent amount of equity and can fire tons of turns in which he will have to fold out his weak hand. In this case, he went ahead and folded the flop. The following hand took place when I first started playing 50NL 5 or 6 months ago, I think. And we have 7-7 in the button. It doesn't show that we're the button here, but that player doesn't have cards, so we are essentially the button. Standard open, 7s, okay, easy, and Parch 999 calls us. I'd played about 100 hands with this player at this point, and he was playing 20 VPIP, 20% of his hands, raising 11 of them, so he was kind of tight, kind of passive. His aggression factor was low, so he was more apt to call than to bet and raise. And that was all the information I had on this player at the time. The board comes jack, 8, deuce with 2 spades. He checks, and in this case, I think it's okay to check and it's okay to bet. One being, he we'll be calling with mainly hands that beat us, so any jack, any 8, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, and not many hands that we beat he calls with. The hands that he would call with are 9-10, giving an open and straight draw. Any spade draw that he might have. Queen 10, he has an overcard and a gut shot. King Queen, Ace Queen, if he calls with those type of hands as well, might be calling some of the time. So I like to just take the more aggressive route and bet here. Okay, I bet and he calls. So essentially all of the range I said he might have had. So rarely are we beating him, crushing him, unless he's calling with pocket 6s, pocket 5s, pocket 4s. The turn comes an ace. It's a relatively good card for us because I don't think he's calling very often with a naked ace on the flop. He would be calling with hands like ace jack and ace 8, but those hands already beat us anyway. So I mean, it doesn't change much in that case. But while he can't have the ace very often, we can. We bet for the flop almost from the button, so a lot of the aces are in our range. We see bet the flop, which is pretty standard. We'd still have a lot of aces in our range. And the ace hitting the turn is more likely to have hit us than hit him. So that is a good card for us. This is a card I definitely think I should be betting. He called once on the flop, so at this point, I'm sort of turning my hand into a bluff a little bit. I hope for him to fold out any 8 he may have, like 8, 9, 8, 7, pocket 9s, pocket 10s. I don't think he's folding any jack. And he will continue to call with, his draws. Like Queen 10 just picked up a double gut shot, so now for Queen 10, a king and a 9 give him a straight. 9-10 will probably still be calling, maybe not, and flush draws will probably come along as well. So I do elect to bet and protect my hand a little bit against draws, and also try to bluff out, use the ace as a scare card and bluff out slightly better hand scenario. Also, if he does have a draw, this player may or may not, if we did check, bluff the river with his missed draws. So we don't gain any additional, and it'll be tough for us to call with 7-7 at that point. So we don't gain any additional value when he does have a draw if we check behind. If he's not a habitual bluffer and start betting the river when we show weakness on the turn. So I prefer to just go ahead and get value from those hands. Maybe not always with a hand as weak as 7-7, but if I had a jack here, I definitely would be betting that and getting value from draws. Whereas, when I first started, I used to love, just checking the turn here in the spot. The ace came, so I wanted to check and induce a bluff from him on the river. But, it's just better because this way it ensures that you always get value from his draws and don't let him draw for free, etc. So I bet $6 and he called. So mainly he's going to have draws here. He may have hit the ace if he did call with like ace queen. Definitely has a lot of jacks in his range. And a 6 comes on the river, which is a blank for the most part. That 6 is never hitting him and unlikely hitting us. Pocket 6s probably goes ahead and folds a turn when we fire 2 barrels on that board. So yeah, it's a blank. And he leads for $13. Yeah, it was kind of weird. I thought maybe he had a flush draw at this point, or 9-10. And at this point, it was many months ago when I was still kind of inexperienced, and I looked him up. I think it's a bad call now, knowing that he's fairly passive with the low aggression factor. He wouldn't. More than likely would just check with his draws and give up. So he did have a nonsensical pair of kings in the spot. I don't understand why he was betting. Rarely was he getting called by worse, and always getting called by better in that spot. So yeah, it didn't make much sense to me, but there it goes. Thus far, I've been talking about hands that had some value. In the first case, we had a gut shot and a lot of backdoor draws. In the second hand, we did have 7-7. Fair to be the best hand a decent amount of the time. In this scenario, I'd like to explain situations in which you want a continuation bet, fire double barrels in which you have very little equity. So it folds around to me. This is 50 NL. I raise 3x. You call big blind. The big blind I had played a decent amount with at the time. He was playing fairly standard tight aggressive game, like 2017, I believe, and he was folding to C bets about 45% of the time, which is, indicative of him not necessarily giving up without strong top pair type hands. So he was continuing a decent amount. The board is ace 5-5. It's a good one for me to C bet. I have jack high in this spot, and it's a dry board, unlikely to have hit him. So he checks, and I bet. He calls. So what is he calling with on this board? Any ace, obviously. Any 5, if he doesn't decide to check raise those hands. There are flush draws as well. And a lot of pairs are calling on this board. Pocket 2s, 3s, 4s, all the way up to probably pocket 9s, pocket 10s, I'd say. Didn't 3-bets before the flop and elected to play a pot and control the size of the pot while they're out of position. Those all make sense. What is our plan at this point? We have jack high, probably the worst hand unless he has a low flush draw. Or more often than not, he has a speed. This board is one we know he's going to call with a lot of pairs on. So anytime a scare card, like let's say a king, a queen, a 10, all of which miss us, hit, then we probably will want to fire at those turns as well, even though our hand has no equity. Why? Because from his point of view, let's say he's sitting here with pocket 6s. We've already shown aggression and on an ace high board, and his hand might or might not be best. On the turn, if a king hits and we keep betting, it changes his equity in the hand in his mind against our perceived hand range. So if we're value betting any ace and any king, it's now more likely that his hand is beat. However, if a card like a 2 falls off, or a 3, or if the ace pairs, it doesn't change his equity very much in his mind against our hand range. So if he called a flop, he's probably calling the turn again. So our plan in these situations where we have total air and need to barrel to win, we will be barreling some cards and just checking and giving up on other cards. In this case, the king does come. So he checks, and like I said, our plan on the flop was to barrel cards like these, because we know he's never folding a 5, an ace, and he may or may not be calling with his flush draws, but we know there's a good percentage chance that he will be folding a lot of the pairs in his range. So since we have no chance to win, we go ahead and bet about half pot. So we only need this bet to work, I'd say about 36% of the time for us to break even. And a lot of his range can't continue on this board. So I suspect it's higher than that. So I think our bet in this situation will be profitable. And he does elect to fold. So this illustrates a reason to stay aggressive when it's calculated and there's a reason to do so, even though our hand has very little equity against his hand range. Thus far, I have been talking about situations in which you should be continuation betting. In the next few examples, I will, however, change the topic a little bit to hands that you might want to consider checking back every once in a while. And I'll give you my reasons for doing so as the hands progress. Jack 4 suited is slightly loose, but I had seen the big blind Pluto Z make a couple call downs with second and third pair, and he was right both times. So I think I could play like a wider range here and bet thinly for value, even with weak jacks and I thought it was slightly loose, but okay against this player. The hands he did make those hero calls with um, were pretty good reads, I thought, even though he had weak holdings. The other players weren't representing much, and he was able to pick off a couple of. So I think he's a decent hand reader as well. He calls, and I flop a jack high flush draw on a dry board. Again, I said he's very aggressive. This board is unlikely to have hit me, so he checks. And normally I just bet all my flush draws, and it's kind of a no-brainer. But this player was pretty aggressive. I thought he may be check raising me on this board a decent amount because it's pretty dry. 10-7 deuce, I'm unlikely to have hit that very hard. And I kind of wanted to control this end of the pot a little. Also, I seen him make a couple call downs. I thought it was a good hand reader, and occasionally with people that I think are very good, I will do things like this, like check back a flush draw here, or sometimes check back a 10, just because they'll never expect it. It's for deception. It's very rare, but occasionally I do it. And in this case, I was somewhat fearful of a check raise in which I would have to fold tons of turns when I miss, and I'm hardly ever hitting the flush on the turn. So I go ahead and check back and hit the flush on the turn, and he bets into me. So that's great. I expect him to be doing this with air a lot. Since I didn't fire the flop, he pretty much knows I didn't hit it. I'm very unlikely to have hit the flush. So my hand just really can't be that strong on the spot, normally. So I go ahead and raise. I'm hoping he has a 10 here, or like pocket 9s, pocket 8s. I said he was prone to hero calls. And I made a small raise here. Just give him a little bit more rope to 3-bet here if he were putting me on air. Occasionally I will be raising here with maybe just the lone ace of hearts. So, I mean, yeah, I made a small, and he calls. And the 8 comes, and he makes a small blocker type bet. He bets 650 into 1525, and obviously I think my hand here is best probably 90% of the time. Occasionally I'll show up with bigger flushes, but my hand is almost certainly best. I thought he would bet 3-bet the turn with bigger flushes, and definitely bet bigger on the river with those hands. So I go ahead and make a raise, and he calls with king 7. So second pair, or third pair now by the river. Again, I mean, normally just bet your flush draws, bet your top pair hands. In certain cases where the player is very aggressive and will be check raising you a lot, and you kind of want to reduce variance, this player type is okay to check back against with 9-out draws and weak top pairs. This will throw off their hand rating, and I mean, I doubt he ever put me on a flush here. He would normally be right. So occasionally mixing up your lines and doing it for that reason, it's a good reason to check back hands like Jack 4 suited, where you can raise the turn when the flush hits and make it look like you could never have hit the flush. This hand differs from the last hand example. It's another hand I will be checking back on the flop, and it's not for deception purposes. I will get to it as the hand progresses. So Kirok limps from first position, and I thought he was a pretty weak player. He's a good spot in the game. He was playing about 59, so really, really loose passive. But his aggression factor was really high. It was like 4.0, meaning he was betting and raising a lot. When you're playing half your hands, your aggression factor should be really low, right? Because you usually miss. And he was continuing the hand, and he had a really high aggression factor for that volume put in pot. So it means he was really a loose player, and very aggressive after the flop. So Ace King is a great hand to isolate him with. He calls. On a board of 2-3-3, he's playing half his hand, so most of them just missed outright. Most of them are behind Ace King. And the ones he probably will be continuing with are, hands that beat me, pocket pairs that called. So, and if he's playing half his hands, he does have some threes in his range, but pocket fours all the way up to probably, like pocket nines, he probably wouldn't be raising before the flop. He raised 9% of his hand before the flop, so I'd expect him to be raising pocket tens plus and then big overcards, and then limping a lot of junk, a lot of suited connectors, just no gap connectors like 7, 8, 8, 9, just a lot of hands. So he checks, and in this spot, it doesn't make sense for me really to bet. Ace King is likely the best hand, so maybe I should bet for value. But how often is he calling on that board with, well, I guess he is calling occasionally with hands that I beat, like King Jack, Jack 10, but a lot of it, like the hands he's limping with, like 7 Jack suited, are just going to fold, Queen 5, 8, 9 offsuit, likely just going to fold, and he's going to be continuing and calling, maybe raising with hands like, all the pairs that beat me. So, I mean, it makes more sense if when I bet, he never folds better hands and only calls with those better hands, and it just doesn't make sense for me to bet in this spot. So I elect to check behind. The turn comes in 8, and he bets a little bit less than 40% of the pot here. Well, the 8 certainly in his range, but again, since I check behind, he's definitely stabbing here with a lot of his hands. 7-5, just all of his air. I imagine he's betting here since he has a really high aggression factor. He's shown to be very aggressive. I expect him to be stabbing at tons of pots. I think Ace King is still best here usually, so I like to call. And the board pairs the 8, and he bets $15. What is he doing this with? I think we're chopping a decent percentage of time. I definitely think he's value betting an ace, and I think he is correct to do so. I'm probably not checking back many pairs on the flop. He's definitely betting any 8 or 3 that he has, but he's also betting, since he's playing half the hands, most of those cards don't contain an ace, which we chop with, so it's not terrible if I call and we just split the pot. And most of them just don't contain an 8 or 3. Most of them are just total garbage. So, I mean, I think it's a very easy call for myself. He has Jack 7 suited. He picked up a flush draw on the turn. But this is an example illustrating the importance of checking back hands like Ace King here. Ace King has great showdown value in a pot where I don't bet. The ace high is, likely best until the river. Not likely best, but a large percentage of the time it's checked down. If I do bet and he calls, Ace King loses a lot of its showdown value. And at that point, I rely on barreling, and I'm probably not barreling this player, or making a pair, and I only have 6 outs. It's a great hand to pick off aggressive players' bluffs on the turn and river when their hand range is super wide. Also, I do have the benefit of when I do hit an ace or king, of if he's betting, I could raise or call at that point as well. So my hand, when behind, can still improve to the best hand. Here's another spot where I think it's okay to sometimes bet on the flop, but generally these are spots where I like to check back, and I'll explain that a little bit once we get to the flop. 10 deuce suited. It's pretty weak hand, very loose. I didn't think the big blind was that great. I thought he was okay, but I think he was mainly tight, so I was just risking 250 to win 150. I thought the majority of the time, and he calls. On a board of King 10 Jack, when he checks to me, there isn't much value here in betting. What hands that he's ahead of are going to fold? I mean, he's probably not going to fold the jack. He's not going to fold the king. And I have a hand here that's, that's probably best against the range of hands he's calling with. He's probably calling with any pair, some suited connectors, and I do risk some free cards here when he does have a queen. But what is he calling with pre-flop that has a queen in it that doesn't have a pair here? I mean, queen jack, queen 10, king queen, ace queen. I mean, those are all reasonable hands that you could have here, but they all beat me. So queen 9 also beats me. I don't think he's calling with queen 8, so I don't really risk many straight cards that will beat me if I'm already ahead. So I'm not really worried about that. If he has a flush draw, then yeah, I'm giving some free cards there. He's usually not going to have a flush draw. The times I do give free cards. But if I do bet, then I think he continues with all better hands and no worse hands. So why is that good for me? I mean, I'm putting in money and only getting called by better. So it's basically a bet that's going to be losing money for me. So I like to check back. The ace comes, he bets $1. I mean, I'm getting 6.5 to 1. I have a pair. I mean, easy call here. And 8 comes, he checks, easy check for me, and he shows pocket sixes that had a flush draw on the turn. Here's a spot where pocket sixes, 7s, 8s are not calling on a king 10 jack board. They just aren't if I bet. So here is an example where people just say, I bet before the flop and I'm betting anytime I hit. This is a good spot to just slow down, think about the board texture, think about his range, and what's continuing and what's not. And you'll notice that when you bet that it just won't be profitable. Anytime he continues, he's beating you. Anytime he does fold, you already had the best hand, so the bet didn't accomplish anything. I hope this video on continuation betting was informative for you guys. I hope it maybe answered some questions or plugged in some holes in your game, both with hands that you want to see bet on the flop and hands you might want to check back. So if you guys have any questions, leave a comment. I'd love to hear it. SoCalQuest signing off. Have a good one.